This weekend, a new werewolf movie drops in theaters, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your favorite werewolf movie. There's actually not as many werewolf movies as you would think, which is one of the reasons I was pretty excited to check out this movie. That, and when I first watched the trailer, it featured Frank Grillo shooting a minigun at a bunch of werewolves, and I went, whatever that is, that movie is designed for me. And so immediately put this one on my radar. And then luckily, just a couple weeks back, the PR team reached out to see if I was interested in interviewing Frank Grillo about the film. And since I was very excited to talk with him about him shooting a minigun at a bunch of werewolves, I absolutely said yes. So I was able to interview him, and then because I enjoyed the movie, spoiler alert for where this review is headed, I also reached out to the director and I was able to interview the director of the film. I'll be incorporating segments of those interviews into this review, but you can also check them out in their entireties somewhere around here. With all that said, let's get started with the good. And right off the bat, as I just mentioned, the basic premise here was something that just seemed like a lot of fun to me. A bunch of us saw the trailer and immediately went, oh, it's like The Purge, except with werewolves. And that was something they were very aware of while they were making the film.
I'm always looking, especially in genre movies, to find something original. It reminded me of Purge Anarchy with werewolves.
He said immediately after he read it, he was like, Steven, this is The Purge with werewolves. And I said, you're right. And we actually had to actively try to make it not so much The Purge with the werewolves, so because we didn't want to step on those toes too much. But it's such a great idea that was easy, the elevator pitch.
Outside of Blumhouse, I don't feel like we get a lot of these high concept, mid-budget action films like we used to, where there's this real simple elevator pitch where you get the concept, what the movie offers, very simply put. The Purge with werewolves. Frank Grillo shoots a minigun at werewolves, tries to survive while there's werewolves everywhere. Like, it's so simple, and you can hear it and you go, that's for me, or you go, it's not for me. It doesn't need to be this big mass appeal film designed for everybody. It's a movie with a very simple, straightforward premise that some people will absolutely love, and then they tailor the movie for that target audience, like myself. And so that, to me, is just what I enjoyed about it. I like these types of movies, and normally I can only get them direct to video. This one is getting a bit of a theatrical release. So how intentional were those 80s vibes, and what were those movies you're trying to pull from it and influence?
Yeah, it's 100% intentional. I'm an 80s kid at heart too. Like, I grew up
just looking behind you.
Yeah. I grew up on these movies. They're my favorite. I love that sort of vibe, style. I love the feel where it sort of oozes off the screen. You can feel everything. You can touch it. That to me was really important when making the movie.
Of course, I like the pitch as a very superficial reason to enjoy the movie. Beyond that, I think it brings some interesting stuff to the werewolf lore. A lot of werewolf movies, it's generally just one or two werewolves. Someone gets bit and then they have it and they're trying to control it. And this kind of takes the lore in this other direction where essentially everyone has this werewolf gene that has only recently been exposed because of this super full moon event that takes place that brings it out. And so that's different. That's not something that we've seen before with werewolf lore, where they're just everywhere. It's utter chaos. We're trying to figure out what to do with this as a society. And that element right there is actually what made my wife interested in checking out the film. Whereas for me, Frank Grillo, minigun, awesome. For her, she watched the trailer and she doesn't like horror movies. She'd never seen a Purge movie. She watched the trailer and liked that idea of this different lore to be explored. And so she watched the movie with me, which actually kind of surprised me. And she enjoyed it because it brings some of those other elements and builds out the mythology a little bit bigger.
Yeah, the writer had such great, strong ideas about how that was very early on, and we were constantly in talks. I mean, even when we were doing early rewrites of the material with him, we were in contact, obviously, daily to make sure that that sort of mythos was grounded. It felt realistic. It almost felt like a virus. And to be honest, it was sort of hitting right at the time. We got the script before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we were like, wow, this is just sort of feeding into what we were already doing, which was wild. Well, I think the biggest things we wanted to do was give the werewolves personality. To me, that was something I had not seen in werewolf films before. They're usually pretty straightforward. They look very similar. So to me, it was like, how can I give each werewolf its own personality? Decide, because of who they changed from and where the person that they were changing into a wolf, how can I sort of infuse that personality into each wolf?
It's the first movie, of course, in this werewolf adventure. Maybe they'll do sequels. You could see where they could because of the nature of the lore that they've established. But it also feels like it is following up a movie or they could make the prequel as a follow-up if this movie does well. And so you feel like you're dropping right into the middle of just kind of this chaos in the world where we're trying to figure everything out. So there's a little bit of like research in it, not conspiracy necessarily, but government trying to work through some things. It plays as an action movie because you got the miniguns in there. It plays as a horror movie because there's werewolves eating people. And then individual scenes and the overall vibe has kind of this thriller aspect to it, where even as I was talking with Frank, he discussed how some of his favorite sequences weren't the ones that were overtly action or horror based, but just the tension built in the moments.
To keep that tension from the beginning of the movie right until the end. There's very little chance for you to kind of take a breath before you're up in your seat again, and that's what makes movies like this great. Like, I have a scene where I'm under a car with Katrina Law. I mean, I was literally afraid, as if they were going to reach under and snatch me.
Another thing I enjoyed about the movie, it's designed to be a throwback film. The director of the movie, in so many ways, we have very similar tastes in movies, grew up watching a lot of the same movies. So even as I was interviewing him, he kept referencing films that he was like, I wanted it to be like this. I wanted to pull in influences from this. And they were all movies that are close to my heart, of just 80s, 90s, practical effects. And so it feels like a movie made from a different era. While, of course, we've got influences from films from the last 10, 15 years with the Purge movies, the way that it's designed to be is from that era of movies that I grew up watching that made me love movies. And there are just so many little movies that he kept referencing all throughout our interview that was like, yes, I noticed that. Yes, I loved that.
And then when it comes to action, like this movie takes a lot of cues from the original Blade and Blade 2, which is movies that in the late 90s really took action and vampire mythos horror and blended it really well together. Yeah, Dog Soldiers was a big one because I felt like that was one that really mixed the action with the werewolf pretty heavily, and the look of the werewolf was so great. Obviously, The Howling and American Werewolf in London were big influences as far as 80s genre that I was trying to go for. But Underworld was a big one, too, because I thought what the first Underworld did in that movie was really give werewolves on-screen time that had not really been done. I mean, we saw the werewolves in that movie 90% of the time.
And of course, the other piece to this is that it goes practical. So many modern horror films or just action movies in general lean so heavily into the CGI that you just kind of get used to watching these live action, highly advanced cartoons, basically. And even the way that creatures move, and they're so fast, but you know it's not a real thing. And as soon as you're watching this, you're watching practical werewolf effects with these 7-foot-tall guys in werewolf suits. And so they're practical things. You can feel them present on set. And that to me just reminded me of a different era of filmmaking. And I just enjoy that sort of thing. Now, this is definitely a genre film that it's designed for people that like these types of movies, like this type of lore, and that's me. So it was right up my alley. I had a great time with it, and it was cool that I got to talk to the star and the director and, could try and help support a movie that it's the type of movie that I want to be, more of these to be made. We don't have enough of these mid-budget action films and with high concept, doing something just a little bit different. It's familiar, it's like The Purge, but it's also fresh and new because we've never seen a werewolf movie quite like this before. In a lot of ways, this is a modern day B movie, and that's so much exactly what I loved about it. It's also a little bit of what can hold it back. Let's move on to the bad. The simple reality of the matter is that this is a movie that is essentially an indie action horror film. They had limited resources. It's not a big studio franchise film. And with limited resources come all of the setbacks and limitations that come with that. Based on the concept, I think they were trying to make a movie probably bigger than their budget could fully deliver on. And I fully respect that. I enjoy that sort of thing, actually. But at the same time, if I'm trying to make a recommendation to other people, a lot of people will watch the film and you'll be able to notice the areas where, budget was limited. We're doing this story that there's supposed to be a little bit of chaos out on the streets. And there's a lot of times where we're going through empty spaces where they just didn't have the budget to fully deliver on specific concepts. And I just think you have to acknowledge that kind of going into the film. Another one on here, as someone that grew up on 80s and 90s movies, the practical effects were something that I really appreciated. I can also definitely see how if you're not used to them, it could be something that could pull you out of the film. The same way that for a lot of us who grew up on practical, we see CGI and immediately kind of have this disconnect sometimes. We just see that we're seeing something animated versus an old school practical effect. People that have grown up on CGI have the reverse problem of they immediately notice the guy in the suit in ways that I don't. And I appreciate that practicality of it and the limitations of it because it's the thing that's really there. And sometimes the fluidity and how active CGI can be is part of what makes it look less real to me. And so I could see a scenario where some people would see the practical effects and it wouldn't be for them. Kind of to the point of all of this, it builds to a crescendo, our climax of it where they go somewhere with the story that I don't feel was fully set up earlier in the movie. And even on kind of the spectacle side to it, didn't deliver quite as much as I hoped that we could get out of it. There's like a choice made. It goes somewhere and you go, oh, I see what you're doing here. Oh, okay, this could be cool. And it's not quite there. It doesn't quite deliver as much as I would like. And just kind of stepping back to the original concept of it that made me go, oh, that looks cool. It is The Purge with werewolves. That's something that you can hear that and go, it's just The Purge with werewolves. Or you can go, oh, it's The Purge with werewolves. You can say that same sentence. It's just The Purge with werewolves, and they got Frank Grillo, the same guy. You can say look at the same information, and maybe you go, it's too derivative, it's too the same. I've seen something like this, and it's just a little tweak on it. And I get it. I can understand why it probably won't win you over if that's the case. It's not reinventing the werewolf genre. This is the classic we'll be talking about 30 years later. But it doesn't need to be. It's not aiming to be. It's aiming to be a fun one that's something that's just a little bit different. It's pulling together kind of two different concepts, the Purge concept with the werewolf lore, and thus in doing something, combining them, it does something just a little bit fresh and different with each of them. That's what I enjoyed about it. It does offer a little bit more maybe for some people that don't normally like werewolf movies, like my wife, who she had a good time with it too, which was really surprising to me. But if you like old school 80s action movies, if you like werewolves, it probably has something you'll enjoy. Overall, it's a B on the entertainment scale, a 7.5 out of 10. And see it, especially if you like those throwback action movies. If you want more movies like this made, go support the film so more of these can get made. You can check out those interviews right over here. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.